Hi, I'm Jim Junot, and this is the Junot Files, and I have a very special guest today, Steve Stoliar, who has, well, his book is Raised Eyebrows. It's about his life inside the house with Groucho Marx. Is that correct, Steve?
That's correct. Yeah, the full title is, let me see if I can remember it. Raised Eyebrows, My Years Inside Groucho's House.
And it's going to be made into a movie.
So I hear, yes. I'm being coy and other freshwater fish. It was recently announced that none other than Rob Zombie, the horror director, was going to be making a film of my humble memoir. And that may seem like a very strange plan. And in fact, it struck me strangely when he told me that he'd like to make it into a film. But as I've gotten to know Rob, I realize we really are kindred souls. And he's second to me in terms of being a Marx Brothers Groucho fan. And in fact, if you've seen any of his early horror films, he populates them with characters named Captain Spaulding and Rufus Firefly. And his plan really is to do justice to my book, which centers on three characters mainly: Groucho in his later years, and Aaron Fleming, who was the controversial young woman actress who was in charge of Groucho's life, and then me at 20, and I was once 20 years old, believe it or don't. And so it's very exciting and a little surreal to realize that I'm going to be able to go to a movie and see myself, the 1974 version of myself on the screen. There hasn't been any thought given at this early point when you're recording this. There has been no casting yet because it's still in the embryonic stages. But I am jazzed about it, and I've really wanted to see my book turned into a film for a long time. And even though some of the press refers to it as a Groucho Marx biopic, it's really going to be more like, I guess, Ed Wood in terms of, was not really a Bela Lugosi biopic. It was about Lugosi towards the end of his life, and then Ed Wood as a young director connecting with him. So likewise, this would be only focusing on those last years when I was inside Groucho's house, taking notes and making extraordinary memories of the people and things that I was witnessing.
Now you met him, and it took a moment for you to meet him because I believe it was 1972 that you well, of course, you were a Groucho Marx or Marx Brothers fan throughout your life from a very young age, according to your book.
Right, and
With your uncle and your
I had an Uncle Joe who was balding with glasses, a mustache, and smoked a cigar and wiggled his eyebrows. So I think that was sort of a genetic imprint. And then I have very hazy memories of the duck dropping down on You Bet Your Life when I was a little kid in St. Louis. So, and my parents used to borrow lines from the movies, like "You must have been vaccinated with a phonograph needle," and things like that. So I finally really officially discovered them when I was in high school and wondered where they'd been hiding all my life, because I just thought they were wonderful, and the films remained fresh after many decades, and Groucho was immediately my favorite of the brothers. And I so wanted to meet him, but I knew he was in his 80s and kind of frail, and I found that he was going to be doing his one-man show at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in Los Angeles. And so I scraped together the whopping ticket price of $9.50, which these days would not get you parking, I'm sure, there. But it was so exciting to see him on the stage, even though my friend Daryl and I were sitting towards the back. The idea that there he is, there's Groucho, my hero, in the same room that I'm in. And it was tough initially realizing how frail he had gotten over the years. But I applauded so hard because I wanted, it's a strange thing, but you'll probably understand as a fan, I wanted the vibrations from my hands to reach his eardrums, because I knew that would be my only chance to connect with him, that he was old and frail, and that was going to be it. And the great consolation prize I got that night was in the parking structure. I was going to my car, and I spotted and recognized Zeppo Marx, the youngest of the brothers, who was trying to find his car. And I thought, well, I'll never be able to meet Groucho, but I can at least meet Zeppo. So I went over and I said, excuse me, Mr. Marx, I just wanted to tell you how much I've enjoyed your films. And he just kind of looked at me and said, well, you weren't enjoying me. You were really enjoying my brothers, weren't you? Fine. If you want to snap at me for the compliment, fine. At least I've been insulted by one of the four Marx brothers. I had a Zeppo story. How many people had that? Of course, I had other Zeppo stories as the years went by, but I was firmly convinced that that night in December of '72 was it. I would never see Groucho again and would have to milk that Zeppo story for all it was worth.
I tell you what, I remember, and I remember reading in your book, you played a big part in getting. I'll give you credit for a big part of getting Animal Crackers re-released.
Well, I'll take that credit. I sometimes I reject credit that I don't feel I deserve, but I will allow myself part credit on that. Animal Crackers had been made in 1930 at Paramount, and then when the old Paramount films were purchased by MCA in the late 50s, Animal Crackers was part of them, but because the license hadn't been renewed, the rights to the film reverted back to the writers and composers of the original play. And at the time, Universal saw no point in spending the money on clearing up the legal tangle and bringing the movie out again because it was just this old black and white movie. But of course, my friends, all being fanatic Marx Brothers fans, thought that it was a crime against entertainment, that this great missing link that had never been on television and hadn't been in theaters since it was reissued, I think, in the late 40s, wasn't available. So when I was a student at UCLA, I started a petition drive with a group of friends. We were the committee for the re-release of Animal Crackers, and we set up a table on Bruin Walk at UCLA. And all of these activist groups surrounded us. They're Krishnas legalizing marijuana, gay rights. Few things have changed, I guess, in the last 40 years. But a lot of passionate political people, in the early '70s, and there we were trying to sign people up, wanting to get an old Marx Brothers movie re-released. But that's what I cared about when I was in college. I didn't care about the other things, but darn, if I could get Animal Crackers off the shelf, I will have accomplished something. And I managed to get in touch with Groucho's representatives, and he came to UCLA, and it was just, I was so excited, and it was such a dreamlike experience. When I finally shook his hand, I said, Groucho, I am very happy to be meeting you after all this time. And he said, well, you should be. Well, we're off and running. And the two of us sat there surrounded by dozens of press and hundreds of students just crushing in to try to hear what he was saying and trying to plug, our cause, getting this film released. And it was just an amazing thing to realize I was sitting next to my hero, chatting away, trying not to faint. But what I realized was, and I really came to realize this after I was rewarded this amazing job of working for him after the film came out, but it became evident even at UCLA on that one day that there was a lot more left to his personality than I had realized when I saw this frail man come out at the Dorothy Chandler. And I remember one of the reporters saying, Groucho, what is the purpose of your appearance here today? And he said, I expect to get lunch. And she said, well, but no, besides that, I may get dinner. So he was still Groucho. He was just, slower and a little softer. But we did get the film out. Universal humored us. And boy, going to the re-premiere, I rented a tuxedo. It was at the United Artists Theater in Westwood. And it ended up breaking the house record that had been set by the French Connection several years earlier. And I have to tell you, few things were as gratifying as sitting in the coffee shop across the street from that theater in the coming days and weeks, and seeing the line nearly around the block of all these college kids who had been wanting to see Animal Crackers and had read that it was finally out again. And that, I mean, it was truly a labor of love. And to my delight, I had a couple of summer jobs in '74 that completely fell through. People promised me jobs that did not come to pass. And so basically with my back against the wall, I thought, you know, is there anything I could do at Groucho's house, however menial, just to keep that link connected, because I had met my hero and served my purpose getting the movie out. So I called Erin Fleming, who was, this woman in charge of Groucho's life and household and everything, and I said, is there anything at all that you think I could do? And she said, well, I used to take care of Groucho's fan mail, but I've become his manager. We really do need someone to handle that, and we also need someone who knows all about the Marx Brothers to organize all of Groucho's memorabilia that's going to be donated to the Smithsonian after he passes away. And in my mind's eye, it's like a Tex Avery cartoon of like showing up at their house before she hung up the phone. I know it wasn't quite like that. And I thought initially that I would be working in a business office, some high-rise on Wilshire Boulevard, and maybe he would come in a couple times a month to sign checks, and I'd catch a glimpse of my hero. She said, oh, no, dear, you'll be working right inside his house. There's a room there you can use as an office, and you can make your own hours. And I thought, they're paying me money to do this? It's amazing. And in fact, and eventually I was given my own key. I could come and go as I wanted. The first week I worked 6 days and then decided to take Sunday off, and I was sitting in our family home in Tarzana on Sunday thinking, why do I want a day off from that? And I showered and got dressed and drove over again because it was like I was so hungry for any contact with Groucho, and here I was just completely immersed in that world, and I couldn't get enough of it. And there was so much to be done that had just built up and backed up because Erin had been shirking her secretarial chores, and there was a lot of work to be done. But there was little Steve sitting at the lunch table. It was a very egalitarian household. There was no sense of the help eating in the kitchen. I was always welcome at the lunch table, and so there I would get to hear Groucho's stories about his brothers and vaudeville and Broadway and films. His guests, I mean, the people that I met at Groucho's, people from his past and his films, such as Maury Riskind and Nat Perrin, and even S.J. Perelman, who was stopped by after one of his around-the-world jaunts that he was always writing about. And then, Mae West and Bob Hope and George Burns, and I would just be sitting there, mostly listening, sometimes participating, and even when no one interesting was there was always Groucho sitting there with me. He always looked forward to getting the Hollywood trade papers in the mail each day, and I would bring him the mail, and then at the lunch table he would give me a report on what had arrived. And one day he sat down and he said, a wonderful bunch of mail you brought me, nothing but requests for money. And I said, well, you got Variety, didn't you? And he said, yes, a variety of requests for money. And it was so reassuring when he would say something like that, because it was really the same mechanism. He phrased that exactly as he would have phrased it in the 30s or 40s. So it was, the idea that I was being paid money to just sort of wade ankle deep in all of his scrapbooks and photos and letters and all this stuff. And then as he got to know me, that was very gratifying, because he realized that I had very similar interests and that I could appreciate the people from his world that he used to know. I mean, George Gershwin and Irving Thalberg and Robert Benchley and James Thurber, all of these mythic people were friends of his. And so he appreciated the fact that I wasn't just some hippie that smoked pot and listened to loud rock and roll, but that I cared about Irving Berlin and Cole Porter and George Kaufman and the Gershwins and that sort of thing. And I think it helped restore his faith that the younger generation weren't just a bunch of hippies who had no appreciation for people from his world. And then on another level, I came to appreciate him as this living connection to the 19th century, because he was born in 1890, which I mean made him literally a Victorian, although obviously American. And so I was, sitting at the lunch table with someone whose firsthand memory stretched from before the Wright brothers to after the moon landing, which is it's a staggering. And I asked him once, how far back do you remember? And he thought a moment and he said, I guess the Spanish-American War, which was 1898. And he told me, when the brothers started, they started as a singing act. And he actually was part of a group of performers who sang and performed at the New York Opera House in order to raise money for victims of the San Francisco earthquake in 1906. So it just, as someone, I mean, I'm sort of a historian at heart and was always fascinated by antiques and fossils and history and all that. So the idea that I'm here with this living link to that past, plus someone who knew all of these remarkable people personally, and then of course, obviously, it's Groucho Marx, the star of Duck Soup and You Bet Your Life and Night at the Opera. So it was just an amazing, amazing experience.
Now, your book, you introduced really early in your book, and you mentioned a controversial figure, Aaron Fleming.
Yes.
And what is your take on Aaron Fleming?
Well, what I have found as I've gotten older, and clearly I have gotten older, not necessarily wiser, but I'm not 20 anymore, is that there are rarely just heroes and villains in life. That, as Andre Gide said, the color of truth is gray, and it's true in Erin's case, because she, on the one hand, she came along at a time when Groucho was sort of semi-retired, and his family really had other priorities. They weren't particularly interested in focusing on looking after their dad. His last wife left him in 1969, and he was sort of rattling around this large house in Beverly Hills doing television, the Dick Cavett show, and different guest spots, but not really much of anything. And Aaron came along just as the whole baby boom generation embraced the anarchy of the Marx Brothers. She didn't create that. Sometimes she's given credit for putting him back on the map, and that isn't true. Because if you've ever seen, there's a 1969 Dick Cavett show where Groucho's the only guest, and this is 2 or 3 years before Aaron came on the scene. And at one point, Groucho is about to sing Lydia the Tattooed Lady, and he says, I'm going to sing a song now that I sang in a picture on a Pullman car. And the audience just goes crazy, whistling and stomping and cheering, and he waits for that to subside, and he said, now why are you applauding Pullman cars? They don't even make them anymore. But they knew even from that introduction that he was going to sing Lydia. So even by the late 60s, the Marx Brothers were already the darling of the younger set that loved that whole anti-establishment thing. But Aaron really did pick him up and dust him off and helped him go out a legend in his own time, which he appreciated, and he loved continuing to perform. The flip side of that is that she was clinically, literally diagnosed as schizophrenic, which is not split personality as some people think, but it is a form of insanity. She was very mercurial. Things that you thought would be totally innocuous would send her into a screaming, door-slamming rage. And then other things that you thought would be very upsetting to her, she would laugh and toss off. And sadly, she was abusive to Groucho. I didn't see physical abuse, but if you know anything about psychology, you know that emotional and verbal abuse can be worse. The whole adage about sticks and stones can break your bones, but names will never harm you. That's not true. Names can be much worse than just smacking someone in the face. And she could be quite abusive and cause his blood pressure to skyrocket. She would scream at him. I think the bottom line was she she wouldn't accept the fact that he was getting old and frail. I think she thought if she screamed at him and shook him and berated him, she could knock the rust off of his brain, that sort of thing. And it wasn't fair because, he was this old, frail man. So those of us in the household did the best we could to be some kind of a buffer between them, but it was a complicated equation because Groucho liked having her around, and if we alienated Aaron, off with our heads. I was ended up being the longest surviving employee there, except for Arturo the gardener, who was literally on the outside, not part of the interior household. But any number of maids, cooks, business managers, lawyers, nurses came and went. They invariably got on Erin's bad side, of which was her bad sides were multifaceted. Somehow I managed to hang on, even though one night when I was sleeping at UCLA in my dorm room, the phone rang in the early morning hours, and this breathy voice said, "I understand you're in on a plot to get rid of me." And the joke about paranoids is that every so often they're right.
They're right. Yes, I mean,
in this case, we were trying to subtract Aaron from the equation and mix in this nurse named Connie, who we thought was a much healthier substitute for Aaron because she was young and attractive. So there'd be the arm candy aspect that Aaron had. But she also really cared about what was best for Groucho and could look after him. And somehow we thought if we were going to have the Bel Air Patrol show up and some of Groucho's older friends who had been alienated by Aaron over the recent years to help cushion the blow of removing her, then his last days might have been smoother and calmer than they were. But instead, somehow she got wind of it, and the whole thing exploded, and she fired the nurse, and she was really in firm control from that point until near the end, when there was a very nasty conservatorship battle between Aaron and Groucho's son Arthur.
And a lot has been written about that part of it, which is, it's sad that he had to go through that at the end of his life.
It is. As I say, we did our best to try to shield him as best we could without, we could do him no good if we were fired. And then towards the end, when there was that battle that I spoke of, Aaron was removed as conservator, and Groucho's longtime friend and co-writer of Monkey Business and Duck Soup, Nat Perrin, was made temporary conservator. And that was really an actually comfortable time. It was sort of a pocket, an eye in the middle of the hurricane, a pocket of calm. While all of this legal stuff, battling going on, Nat was a very calming influence on the household. And he actually asked me if I would stay at the house on weekends, really sort of to be in charge of Groucho's schedule and who was visiting. And it was a remarkable responsibility. I mean, that's far beyond answering fan mail and organizing his memorabilia, because I was actually in a position of having to tell Aaron, I think it's time that you're supposed to leave now, because Arthur's going to be coming over, and he has some friends who are coming over. And she just initially would have none of it. And I heard her on the phone to a friend saying, "Fucking servants are treating me like a cockroach." And poor Nat was getting peppered with complaints. He was getting phone calls day and night from Aaron saying they don't respect me, and from me saying this crazy woman won't listen to reason. And finally he had to go to the judge and say, "I can't handle this. I have no life anymore." And so the judge appointed Groucho's grandson, Andy Marx, as the final permanent conservator, who was actually a great choice because he was on good terms with both Aaron Fleming and with his father, Arthur Marx. So Andy was the last guy that was truly in charge of the place, and Groucho passed away shortly after that. And Groucho wasn't really aware of how contentious things had gotten. I mean, most of that was played out in a courtroom.
Yeah, that's good that he was able to have a peaceful time at the end.
Reasonably, yeah.
Yeah. One last question. Why do the Marx Brothers endure, in your opinion?
That seems like a simple question, but it's a difficult one to answer. The obvious answer is because they're funny. Everyone has their own taste. Some people prefer the Three Stooges or Abbott and Costello or Laurel and Hardy. Obviously, you don't have to be have an exclusive allegiance to any particular comedy team. But I think their stuff stays fresh many years later, and it really is. It's very gratifying to me when someone will say, I have an 8-year-old daughter, and she was laughing at Harpo in one of their movies. And I think, well, I used to be that kid that Groucho's old friends would say, it's wonderful that kids your age appreciate us. And now I'm at the age where I'm saying, it's wonderful to hear that your daughter finds the Marx Brothers funny.
Well, I tell you what, Stephen, I appreciate you taking time tonight. The man's name is Stephen Stoliar, and he has his book is Raised Eyebrows: My Years Inside Groucho Marx's House. Correct? Did I get it right?
Enough. Give the man a cigar and light it, and watch it explode in his face.
See, and they say I don't know anything. The glasses make me smarter. So anyway,
I took mine off.
I appreciate you doing this tonight, Stephen. I really do. And the book is published by Bear Manor Media.
It is, yes. It's available. There's also a Kindle and an audiobook, and I did all the voices on the audiobook, and you can find that either on Amazon or along the Amazon in case you're in Brazil.
I appreciate it, Stephen. Thank you.
My pleasure.
No problem. And that's the Junot Files for now.